Hello, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to our webinar series for strategic applications to medicine. My name is Ashir. I'm one of the managers with StudyMind or MedicMind. We're joined here by one of our top tutors, Bailey, who was advising us a couple of weeks ago on applications to medicine. We're going to be just extending on from the webinar we had 2 weeks ago, where some of you may have attended. But what we're basically discussing today is when things go wrong for the medicine application. And quite a few things can go wrong, especially as it's a very complicated process at first. So we're going to be talking about what happens when you don't get the grades that you require, or you don't get the UCAT score that you require, and also backup options. A few of you may be looking into graduate entry. We will discuss that, but that will be more for next week. So if any of you are graduates, or you have a degree, or you're working towards a degree and want to know about how to strategically apply, we'll dive into that a little bit more next week. But for today, we will be exploring it just briefly. We don't have a picture of Bailey up here, but Bailey has his camera on and he's over here. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Bailey, if that's fine.
So yeah, I don't know why there isn't a picture of me there. I did send a few through. But yeah, I'm Bailey. I'm a fourth year medic at Leicester. Um, yeah, I think there isn't really too much more to me apart from that. I think I've tutored for StudyMind for about the last, or it's about 4 years, I think.
Yeah.
So pretty much at this point, what I don't know, and between me and Ashir, what we don't know probably isn't worth knowing about this whole process. We know it inside and out, so you can pretty much not to say guarantee, but you've got a strong chance if you follow the good advice that we would give you that you have a reasonable chance in most situations.
So just from last week, what we discussed was the basics of finding information. For anyone who wasn't here, you can find the recording on our YouTube channel. So if you search up YouTube StudyMind or MedicMind, you will find it there. So I'd highly suggest watching that again. This is a little bit more of an extension for people who are maybe resitting. And, there are often people think if I have to resit a subject or if I do terrible at the UCAT, my chances are gone. But we're just going to give a little bit of reassurance. Before we do that, one thing I wanted to highlight was there are new medical schools opening up everywhere, and a lot of students I've seen in previous years, and Bailey, you've seen the same as well, where they're
Yeah, definitely.
hesitant to apply to these new universities because they're thinking, oh, what if they're not GMC registered? What if they're not that prestigious? What will affect my career? And the simple answer to that is most of them do get GMC registered. It's just a process they go through, right, Bailey? And
Yeah, completely. And most of them, if something falls through, will have a fail-safe plan. So a lot of these will get you or be able to transfer you to somewhere that is suitable for you to continue your studies. You won't just be dropped.
I don't think I've ever heard of a university shutting down like that.
No, but I know that I think it was I'm gonna say it's Canterbury Christchurch a few years ago had a
Mhm.
problem with their nursing. So that's probably why people have had a bit of anxiety around it.
But for medicine, generally, it's very well governed. And
Oh,
so if you are somebody who doesn't score too well on the UCAT or has a disadvantage with grades, then choosing universities like Bangor or choosing universities like, for example, if you want to go ahead and choose one of the new ones like Hertfordshire over here, which hasn't opened up to UK students, it's more for international students at the minute. But it's something you want to explore because a place in medicine is better than not having a place. But this is something if you guys want to explore, especially those who are maybe in year 11 or 12, this is one of the new universities which often people realize 2 or 3 years later down the line that there's new universities opening up. So keep this one on your radar if you're applying later on. But anyways, we'll move on to the next bit. So today's highlight is about resits, and we're going to be talking a little bit about what policies universities have in place. So I'll let you discuss in more detail, Bailey, if that's fine. So
yeah,
we'll
that's
just
fine.
talk about A levels and GCSE separately.
So, which universities allow resits for A levels? Most of them don't have a problem with it. There are a few, quite understandably, that do have a certain threshold for a reset of A levels. So you can't go from three E's, your first time round, and saying, "Oh, I'm going to get A star AA," and they will accept you. Um, that's obviously unreasonable, but a lot of them will say, or will allow you, if you've got maybe 1 grade under, this is without mitigation, to resit your subject to get it up to the A grade, or some, the name that rings to mind is Newcastle when I think of this, is requires you to get the A* grade, so the one above the standard entrance requirement. Um, GCSE resits, I wouldn't think they have a problem with, especially if it's like a core subject. Um, Sometimes things happen. An exam doesn't go the way you want it to, so you are often given the chance to resit it. As long as there's not a massive disparity between grades, it's normally not a problem. Um, there is more leniency taken in if you have got a mitigating circumstance. So extenuating and mitigating are the same thing. If, for example, you've had some family upheaval happen or a personal significant event happen, and you make the university aware of that when you are applying, that's quite simple as a quick email or something. They often will provide a degree of leniency on that, as they are human. They do understand that these things do happen, so it's not unheard of for them to be quite lenient.
So just one thing to extend on from there, Bailey, and you're absolutely right that most universities have at this point some leniency to the resets. And I'll just put this into perspective because when I applied, the years that because I took a couple of gap years and I did reset a subject too, which was my third subject, economics, and I had A*, B, and I was off by 1 mark, a 1 year mess mark on the economics. So I was absolutely devastated. And at that time, they didn't really allow resets for the third subject for most universities. So I was very limited. But now that I look at some of these reset policies, they are a little bit more lenient in most universities. What you have to be careful of, and you can find this on every single medical school's website, is what the minimum they want the first time around. You will see some universities accepting ABB or 3Bs or AAB, and they often, some of them have either the policy that you can resit and achieve what they want as the minimum requirements. So that might be 3As, might be A*, AA, or they might say that you need an A* in the subject that you got B in. That can happen as well. Some do not mind whatsoever as long as you meet the 3As or A*, AA. There are an awful lot of them. I'll give you some examples and you guys can read up on this as well, but you can find it all on their website. For example, Anglia Ruskin, they will want somebody to achieve AAB the first time around, and that third subject needs to be resat, and you need to achieve at least an A. These can change year to year, so please do not quote me on this and read up what they're saying this year, because it might say the one that you got B in, you need an A*. And if you have widening participation, we'll go into a little bit more about widening participation today as well. You might be better off, and they might say they want 3Bs the first time. The point is, you're not blacklisted, and you're not, by all means, have an automatic filter to now go through graduate entry. So you have to do your research properly, look into where you can apply, and then mitigating circumstances as well, Bailey. I think we all have this fear in school that we have to be the perfect student and there can be nothing wrong with us, right?
100%.
And a lot of students get worried about bringing up issues to their school or parents or anybody that can, might be affecting their grades. But I would highly, highly recommend, if there is anything at all, personal reasons, family trouble, anything with your health, you need to raise that now, especially if you're in year 12, year 11, and it's affecting your performance. Because most students who get really good grades at GCSEs and aspiring to become medics, a lot of the time that they end up doing worse at A levels is not because of their intellect, it's because of things affecting them outside of their education. And if you make that clear and it's well documented, supported by a professional, universities will not look at that negatively. They'll actually help support you. So that's what we mean by extenuating circumstances. Some universities will ask you to fill in a form and provide some evidence. Some universities might accept you writing in your personal statement. We'll go into that a little bit more. Let's just briefly to cover resit. So if you are somebody who's achieved your A levels this year, you're applying and you maybe got a B in your third subject, hope is not lost. Your school, you can contact them to sort of predict the grade to be an A. That's what my school did. They predicted me actually to get an A star, or it was an A, I can't remember actually, my third subject. And then you can go ahead and resit that subject. And the universities will think of you as a normal candidate applying, and that policy doesn't mean you'll be disadvantaged. So that covers most of resits. Bailey, have you got anything else to add there?
No, I haven't. It's exactly what I would have said.
We'll go
Um,
into graduate entry. So I'll cover this one if that's fine, Bailey.
yeah,
Because I'm a little bit more knowledge. I personally did not apply for graduate entry, but I've spoken to a lot of students. So if you are somebody who actually, just a quick show of hands, if is anybody considering graduate entry over here, if you can raise your hand on Zoom, or to say something in the chat. Great. So Mohammed is looking at graduate entry, and we'll cover it anyways because for some students this will be important. If things go wrong, sometimes you may Chantel as well. So if you are looking at graduate entry, now GAMSAT and UCAT are two different routes into medicine. Graduate entry is a 4-year course, so generally people will sometimes not meet the A-level requirements, unfortunately will not have the right GCSEs, and or maybe they want to do another career first, so they want to choose maybe something like law. And if that's the case, you do another degree first, you often have to reapply to graduate entry afterwards, and it's considered a postgraduate degree at that point. We'll answer questions about funding, etc. in a moment, but there's two routes. You can either do the UCAT or the GAMSAT. Now, the GAMSAT is a 5.5-hour exam. There's 3 sections on it. There is one in humanitarian sciences and sociology in the first section. So it was a bit more like verbal reasoning, UCAT, but quite different actually. Section 2 is the 2 essays they have to write. It can be on multiple themes. Third section is on biology, chemistry, physics, and math. Mostly biology and chemistry, but it's almost identical to the first year of university if you were studying those subjects. Now, it's a very tough exam, and it's designed for those candidates who perhaps have done a degree doesn't have enough biology or chemistry in it. So if you did law, for example, first, and you wanted to apply to medical school, most universities who accept UCAT at graduate entry level, they will not take you on because they don't recognize your degree as suitable to apply. Instead, you'll have to do the GAMSAT, and the most universities who take the GAMSAT will say they accept any degree. So they're fine with any degree. This is not hard and fast rule, it can vary, but that's if you have a biomedical sciences degree or you have like a biochemistry degree and you're planning to apply to graduate entry, I would suggest the UCAT route because you'll have more than enough university choices to choose the UCAT. However, if you do something else, most likely to fill in the 4 spots, you'll have to do the GAMSAT. That's because you're often trying to prove through this exam that you have enough biology and chemistry knowledge. Some people get really worried thinking it's more and more competitive. Yes, it is. It is in ratio wise, it is for sure. But Bailey, you and I both know there is how many people sit the UCAT? It's around 36,000, right?
yeah, it's about 36,000, I think, from the last
Yes.
time I checked.
And this is we're targeting really the best students here. So if you score really, really high, or even if you score above average, you've got 8s and 9s, you've got A star, AA, there is a lot of buffer competition as well. What I call buffer competition is people who perhaps are well below the requirements and they apply anyways. And that is a thing, it does exist. Me and Bailey have been through the same system and we realize afterwards when we're on the other end that happens. So I wouldn't necessarily look at the numbers. You want to the higher score you have in the GAMSAT, if you get a 2-1 or a first class degree, meaning you score the best in your degree, you still have very good chances. So if worse comes to worse and you don't have really good grades right now, you can explore that later on. However, if you are somebody who is in year 13 right now or finished your A levels, you haven't got the ideal grades and you want to go for graduate entry, try and do something related to medicine, pharmacy, biomedical sciences, or a degree that you can then later on apply to UCAT universities because UCAT is awfully easier than GAMSAT. I think most of us who are in medicine would agree with that. What do you think, Bailey?
Yeah, and a point to add upon that, this does depend on university to university, but some um medical schools do have a transfer scheme, so where you can transfer from biological sciences or biomedical science first year, do very well in that year, and then transfer. They are competitive. It's a very competitive pathway. but it is one that, you know, if you don't want to have to do the whole degree, it is one you could think about. But that's the only thing I think I would add.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And we will be exploring this more next week, if that's fine. So anybody who is a graduate, please attend next week's webinar. It'll be at the same time, same Zoom link. Join us then, and we will be exploring universities a little bit more in detail at that point and showing you some previous statistics as well. A good GAMSAT score can vary. However, aim for a first class in your degree. That will make things so much more easier. Or aim for a 2-1. And then a score generally on GAMSAT as an average. If you get above 60, you have decent, good chances if you have a 2-1 or a first class. 65 or above makes it quite good and a very good standing, actually. And at graduate entry level UCAT, you will need higher. Most universities will expect higher grades because there's less seats, and there's often people scoring much higher at graduate entry. So I'll give you an example. King's College London, there is a document which, if we get time, I will show you from previous years which they have released, that shows most people who have a first class degree will be scoring above 2,800 on the UCAT. That was the old scale, so that would translate now to about 2,100 or above. If you have a 2-1, you would probably need a bit higher. And these are for people who are interviewed. Anyways, we'll go on to the next one, if that's all right, Billy.
Yeah.
Back.
So I mean, if you're not eligible for graduate entry or undergrad, um, there are a lot of universities now popping up in the eastern parts of Europe that or central parts of Europe that are offering it. There is one in Prague of whose name I cannot remember. And there is one in Bulgaria whose also name I can't offhand remember. There is also the University of Nicosia in Cyprus, who are also offering, UK accredited medical degrees. But obviously you'd be studying out in Cyprus or the Czech Republic or Bulgaria. Um, Alternative careers wise, you could consider pharmacy or another allied healthcare profession, especially with the rise in allied health practitioners. So AHPs, like your advanced nurse practitioners, things like that, who are more and more taking on roles that a doctor would normally do. So, obviously there is those sort of options as well.
Yeah. And just to add on to the Eastern Europe, Bailey, did you ever consider Eastern Europe as a potential route if you didn't get in?
No, I didn't. Purely because I get a bit sick on planes. And I thought, no, I don't think I'd be able to handle that many flights a year.
So the reason why I ask is because I actually did. And I know a lot of students do, and there's a lot of questions they have. So I'll go through some of the questions that I had and what other students tend to have as well. First thing about Eastern Europe is it's not a bad option if you do. I have many friends from school who did end up going to Bulgaria to study medicine and dentistry, and they are now practicing in the UK. And they don't. It's not necessarily a bad thing, and it's not something where if you go to that university, you'll be disadvantaged. The only thing I would say is that they are prioritizing UK graduates for specialty training. If I'm correct, Bailey, they are now doing that.
Yeah, I don't know whether they've Mr. Streeting has fully got behind that, but there has been a lot of chat about them now doing that.
Yeah, I'm not fully up to date with what the latest is on that. However, they are definitely looking into prioritizing UK graduates. So that's one thing. If you do go to Eastern Europe, you will be considered an international medical graduate. Although, you are a UK citizen or a UK home student, you will be considered somebody who's an international medical graduate. And at that point, when you are applying for, let's say you do foundation 1 year and foundation year 2, which is what all doctors do before they consider any career route, at that time, there are ways to compensate if you do want to get into, like, let's say you want to do cardiology, there are ways of building a portfolio. We won't go into too much detail with that in this webinar, but
Oh God, yeah. I don't think they
teaching,
need to know about Caesar pathways just
yes,
yet.
We don't need to go into that yet, but there is an awful lot there. However, at your level, what we would say is that doing medicine and getting the degree, there will always be opportunities. It's one of those supply and demand things. I remember 20 years ago, my father saying that at that time, the GP was really hard to get into. However, in the last 5, 6 years, actually, GP was a little bit easier compared to other specialties.
I think everything's hard to get into now.
Everything is harder to get. You're right there, really, and that's often because of a pipeline, because there's not enough consultants to teach, not enough training positions. But that's a whole nother story there. Anyways, what we mean to say is, if you are considering medicine, Eastern Europe is not a bad way to go. You do have to pay out of pocket with it. You are recognized, and most of these medical schools are under the World Health Organization. So you will, wherever you decide to practice afterwards, whether you go to the UK or another country afterwards, you will still be considered. And generally, they do not have a very strict requirement into the entrance exams. Most of them have a biology and chemistry exam, which is based off of A levels. And at the time when I asked, before I got into medical school, I needed something like 67% on one of those exams to get in, as long as I met the A level requirements, which were not particularly that high. So it's a good option. The medical training, I cannot speak for. I personally don't know much about it, but it's something you can explore. Generally, though, I have not seen people come back here and struggle with practice afterwards. Anyways, another thing you can do is, if you're a graduate and you do not get that 2-1 or first class degree, you can compensate with a master's. And sometimes that, even if you get a 2-2, it can be considered equivalent to 2-1 or first class if you do a master's afterwards. And one thing about graduate entry, a lot of people get worried about funding. So I was reading this actually the other day, Bailey. You know how in 5th year we get NHS bursary, which is where if you're in the final year of medical school, the NHS will actually pay for your degree. For graduate entry, a lot of parents and some students get worried that I'll be paying out of pocket because it's a postgraduate degree. That's partially true. You will pay some fees out of pocket, but the NHS bursary actually covers the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year at graduate entry. So if you do decide to go down that route, and I will just show you actually, just getting this up, and I'm just going to share my screen on the NHS bursary if that's fine for you guys. And often people don't get clear-cut answers about this. So I'm just going to take the screen off for 1 second, if that's all right, Bailey.
Yeah, it's fine.
I hope you can all see my screen there. Now, if you're on a graduate entry course lasting 3 or 4 years, you will be considered, and they generally do pay for it. And if you look on here, if you're on a graduate course lasting 4 years, you can apply for years 2, 3, and 4. And if you're in 3 years, for 2 and 3. If you're undergraduate, you can apply for 5 and 6, meaning most graduate entry programs are 4 years anyways. So they will pay for your tuition fee in 2nd, 3rd, and 4th year. This means that actually you're not even taking a student loan at this point. So graduate entry is not a bad option, essentially. The only thing is that if you do end up having to repeat a year, things can get a little bit messy, and sometimes resits are a thing in medical school. Anyways, that's for the graduates there. It's worth always checking with NHS bursary as well. You can, contact them and ask them just for clarification, but this is what it says on their website. So that's just a bit of reassurance there. You wouldn't get full student loans like you do with undergraduate, but still, graduate entry is not as where you're just paying £9,000 each year out of your pocket each time as well. Great. So move on to the cases, if that's all right, Bailey. Yeah.
Yep, I'm just sorting that out. I
thought what would be a fun activity, Bailey, should we ask the students what they think about where the student should apply? So
yeah, actually,
it might be a little bit more interactive for them, just to see who probably has done their research as well. So we'll give you guys a couple of minutes. And if you can put one choice, whoever has ideas, feel free to put your hands up if you want to talk about it. Put it in the chat that what university this person should apply to and why. I think some of the information is awfully vague, but this is a lot of what the filtering comes down to. Okay, so Matt has said Holyoke, interesting. Would you agree with that one, Bailey?
Um, yeah, I mean, I'd say that could be a fair enough option. I mean, they do take a slight more emphasis than this on the UCAT, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it is over 600 average, so you probably are. It's about 600, 650 average, so you're probably not too bad, but I wouldn't say it's the first one I'd say to someone. There have been a few more. So, Emanuela has said Sunderland. Yeah, was actually the first one I was thinking of when I saw this. I'm hoping that we'll have a few more of the ones I'm thinking of. Leicester. Um, I'd say it's a bit risky. Leicester do put a little bit more emphasis than this on the UCAT. Um, I mean, they do have a scoring system for Leicester, which is very complicated to go through. But given the students' GCSEs and the threshold they normally place, I think it might be a little bit above what they
Mm-hmm.
could realistically do. They might be on the borderline, but I would often explain that to students. Plymouth could be a shout. Um, Historically, they've normally gone quite low on the UCAT. They have started to raise it a little bit, but again, it could be a shout, especially with situational judgment. They're not one to overly fixate on that. So, yeah, and the GCSE grades, they would meet their minimum, which is good.
The very interesting thing about Plymouth, Bailey, is actually they even accept a B in the third subject, right?
Yeah, they do. They do, especially if you're widening participation, they will. Um, I mean, I would encourage the student to resit either way. If they, depending on what they get, but I mean, it is definitely a good shout. Um, Birmingham, I would not suggest for this student in any way. Birmingham historically have had a really high UCAT threshold. Most times, um, well, I would say most people I wouldn't suggest above 3,000 on the old way. So about 2,200 on this sort of side, I wouldn't suggest you apply to Birmingham. And the grade requirements of Birmingham are a lot more stringent. They are normally for quite the higher end student, which unfortunately this student isn't.
Yeah.
Question, please. As an international student, what is equivalent of a GCSE? You'd have to check that with universities. With international qualifications, they can be a bit funny. Depends upon what you've got, whether it's like the IGCSE they might not accept, but they might accept international baccalaureate. But I would advise you to email the medical schools you're wishing to apply to directly to see what and whether they'll accept that.
So a lot of them do have international, they have a contact like a team that you can speak to about this. Some universities have on their website very clearly what qualifications they'll take from different countries. However, some countries, some qualifications are not seeing the equivalent of A levels or GCSEs, which means if that's the case, you either have to look at other options. Each university has their own way about it. So, for one very popular country we get a lot of students coming from is India, and they do something called the CBSE program. And some universities recognize that as equivalent to A levels, and some do not. The ones who do will very clearly tell you how much percentage you need on your exams and for which subjects as a minimum. And the ones who do not, you would not be able to apply there unless you did A levels or an IB equivalent, which means you'd have to do it again and then apply. So this is worthwhile asking the universities. You can also look up all of this on their website too. Very interesting thing Bailey said here about Plymouth is that they are increasing some of the historically it was a very, very low UCAT score that they wanted. But
Yeah, I think normally I'd normally say to someone if they were on the lower end, so about what I'd normally go between 600 and 625 a category. So between
yeah,
2.4 and 2.6, I'd have always suggested Plymouth as an option. But now, because everyone with that threshold is going there, they have started to increase it slightly. So it is one of those ones would be now to watch, really.
I will just share my screen again and show you guys something interesting. It does fluctuate. So a lot of what we tell you guys is to look at the trends, not purely at the scores themselves as well. These two, I think Bailey is talking about these 2 years here, which was incredibly competitive. And it raised up to this person's example that we had up on the screen was 2,612 translated. 1,960 is around that range. But 2023 was the only year that they couldn't meet, and 2022 was very close. One thing I would say though is that you wouldn't normally expect a cutoff score jump of like 400 in certain years. It's very unusual. Last few years have been a little bit more unstable, I would say.
Yeah,
However,
because in 2021, what they also did was up the A levels
yes,
post selection. So nobody who applied to Plymouth knew that they'd up their requirements from 3As to A star AA until after the cut-off time had happened. So
yeah.
that was another thing that they had started to do as well.
And this is very, very interesting because a lot of the times, you have to, what I would say is look at all the previous data they give, and you can find previous data through the website or by asking them, reading through their policies, and try and see how many years you're actually above the threshold for, how many years you actually would have probably got an interview, and then work out a percentage probability from that. That's how you want to rank your universities. For this student, I actually think Plymouth's not a bad idea. What do you think, Bailey?
I don't think they'd be too bad. I mean, they might be sort of on the edge, but I would say it's a fair shout.
Mhm. Sunderland, however, the other option that was given was quite good, I think.
Yeah,
Especially if the
definitely.
student, let's
They've
say if this,
always been third decile and above is generally fine with
the
Sunderland.
only caveat with that, I think, is the roles and responsibilities form. They have to give a lot more, like a little
Yeah,
bit more of a
I
reason for
think that's
what.
basically another personal statement. So
Yes,
if you
yeah,
can get through that, I mean, if you can get through your personal statement, you can do the roles and responsibilities forms.
yeah,
Um, I don't think they're actually a too bad a form from what I've seen of them anyway. And that's why I've compared it to a personal statement because
and
it's as I've helped students with them. So that's
yeah.
what I've certainly seen.
And more so, since you have helped students, would you say it's more important about their what experience they have or how they write about it? Let's say, for example, I've spent 6 months in, I don't know, every day with a cardiothoracic surgeon watching various surgeries. Is that more valuable, or is it somebody who maybe has spent a day in emergency room, but then written really well about what they learned from it and how they're a better individual? What would you say?
I've always said, and I think you've always known this about me. I'm a big fan of it's not what you've done, it's what you've learned from it.
Yeah,
And if you've shadowed a consultant cardiothoracic surgeon for 6 months every day, one, I'm surprised you managed to get that.
yeah,
And B, it doesn't matter. A medical school doesn't care what you've done. What they care about is have you learned about the key qualities and aptitudes of a doctor? And I think ED is probably more reflective, if anything. Certainly from when I've been in A&E, it's certainly a an eye opener,
mhm,
to say the least. Um, but yeah, I certainly think that yeah, it's definitely definitely more what you know about it than what you've done. And I'd even say the same with part-time work. So if you've done, let's say you've only got a little bit of work experience, so let's say, I don't know, a week's work experience, you've done a little bit of charity work, but not much. But for the last year and a half, you've kept a part-time job. I would say that stands out to me more than the person who's done 6 months shadowing. that's certainly going to say more because you've been able to keep down a job, which is tough at sixth form, and you've been able to learn all of these transferable skills that you likely would have seen in your work experience, and you're developing them. So yeah, I mean, certainly it's definitely more a picture of what you've it's not what you've done, it's what you've written about, essentially. So let's have a look at our second case. Um, what are your thoughts on this?
Let's get what the students. Let's see what the students say. Or the
Yeah.
parents over here today. So, uh, you know, it's so it's a bit of a tough one, really. I think the UCAT score is not looking too good here, but the student looks fantastic when it comes to grades.
Yeah.
We'll just see what everyone else thinks. Like, first, in
Yeah,
fact,
I'm hoping
the
they've
question should be: is do they have realistic chances of getting an interview?
funny you should say band four equals no, Matt. Some of them don't look at SJT, so Plymouth doesn't look at SJT, and there are a few others that don't happen to look at SJT. So um, that doesn't automatically rule it out. I mean, it severely limits you, but doesn't rule you out.
Yeah, band four. I think you have to read the policies very carefully of each university. Most will probably say no, but there are lots that will actually even say we do not consider it. And even then, a score of like 1760, I think even
Is not particularly strong. It's not even 600 average a category. So
yeah,
at that point, I am, if I'm presented with this as a tutor, I'm sitting here thinking, what sort of preparation have you done, if any? And
and it
then
can happen. With mishaps can happen, right, Bailey? With the
yeah,
results,
they
yeah,
can happen,
yeah,
but there's a point where as a tutor, you've seen enough people that when it goes badly, and then there's obviously, this sort of situation where you've got under 600 where, and bottom of band four, which says to me that a student hasn't grasped even the most basic of concepts with SJT. Because obviously, if you read the descriptor for band four, it's a significant deviation from the, accepted level of judgment.
mhm,
Um, and when you read the SJT scenarios, they're not particularly complicated scenarios in, with as we've done other situational judgment exams. Um, but I don't think have we got anyone else in the chat that has said anything? Let me just have a quick check.
I think we have
Um,
somebody asking about 1600. I think Hemalata has had a question about um, the twin girls, which we'll get back to towards the end, I think. But the 1600, I think that comes out to an average of like 530, right, really? Just off the top of my head, about five.
yeah, 533. So not not as good as we'd like it to be.
In fact,
Um,
actually, just a very interesting thing, sorry to interrupt there, is just most universities, if you are below even the third or fourth decile, will not consider you. So Sunderland, for example, which is the one that we were talking about earlier, and even Kiel, they mostly judge based on the personal statement, and which is correct for Kiel, but then Sunderland is the roles and responsibilities form. This
but even
particular
Kew
student,
has a threshold. I think Kew, I mean, on the old way, it was 2,200 and something.
yes,
Um,
yeah,
but even that works out to be, what does that work out to be?
um,
560, let's
yeah,
say. Um, that's still, obviously that, still below the old average for Kill, which was known as if you got a really low UCAT score, chuck your application at Kiel. That was the, everyone kind of knew that was the one that was a safe bet. Um, but with a score, even of 1,760 going downwards,
Mhm.
your chances of getting even an interview first time round is very minimal if you don't, even if you have widening participation or anything like that. I remember my first time I applied, I think, and this was on the old system, and I'm not even ashamed to admit it at this point. My score was 1,760, so literally not far off this on the old spectrum. So, I was pretty down there. And by some miracle, I managed to get an interview. But that was by some absolute chance because I met pretty much every single widening access criteria. And I even think that might have been a mistake. But I would say to a student like this, try and get your grades up as much as you can. If we can get you from A star AA to 2 A stars and an A, even better. And then give you next time to really focus in on that UCAT, because that's the only bad bit about this application is the UCAT score. Everything else is amazing.
And the very, I think, interesting thing you said there is wider context does apply. We've given very basic profiles here, but things like widening participation, if you are eligible for it, it does even out the playing field, particularly with some universities. So let's say if the student was eligible for it, then some universities will consider a lower threshold. And you will see that actually they're categorized into different subset of students. So if you look at Dundee's statistics or Aberdeen's as well, they'll have different cutoffs or different averages for people who are from a contextual background. So if the student was from a contextual background, there are some chances, still quite minimal. You have to research it very quickly. I think for this particular student, our main advice would be, yes, you can try your luck this year, but however, most likely they'll need to resit the UCAT next year. And the really frustrating thing about the UCAT, I guess, is you can only do it once per year, unless you have technical issues on the day, which the student could have had. And if you do have technical issues on the day and it's not your fault, they will let you resit it. So you have to let them know. Don't go with sometimes they'll say, we'll give you an annotation. Do not go with the annotation. If you are going to sit in the next 2 weeks, they will sometimes let you resit it. Even in some years, there were lots of technical issues when people were doing it from their home as well. During the COVID years, people could sit from home. And sometimes there's some issues with the system. And I know personally a lot of students that I taught for the UCAT then ended up having to redo it because of that. So that can still happen. Like, for example, the computer freezes or you have an issue in the room. Still not unheard of. However, this student, I do not think they should take another degree up. Do you agree with that, Bailey? Probably gap
Oh,
year.
100%. If you've got those grades, I would be telling you to hold fire big time.
Yeah. And reapply just next year. That's the
Yeah.
best way. And the gap year will have no detriment whatsoever. Somebody has asked one interesting question. How significant are the GCSE grades besides English and maths? Now, there are so many medical schools at this point that each of them have their own subset of how they're going to look at it. Some will just say, as long as you meet our minimum requirements of like six sixes, for example, or six Bs, we don't care about the GCSEs anything more than that. Then there's another subset of universities who will actually then look at scoring your GCSEs, and that's where all your GCSEs, 8 or 9 of them or 6 of them will matter. And then some universities will actually just say, as long as you get 7 in English and maths or 6 in English and maths, we don't care about the rest. However, you have to read it carefully. And what I would suggest doing for every student at this stage is open up the admissions policies for each university and start writing down on a Word document or an Excel sheet or on a piece of paper what your score comes out to, how you match up to previous year statistics, and spend a few hours doing that and seeing where you are with that each university. That's the best way of doing it. This is something people do not spend enough time on, and they should, in order to get the highest chance of an interview.
Yeah, I mean, if you want a quick summary of all the admissions policies on grades, I mean, I hate to say the word, but you could even use something like Chat GPT.
I would just say one thing about ChatGPT though, Bailey. I have, interestingly enough, tried to use it to test it out. It does not always give the most accurate information. I know it's a very, very good tool. However, sometimes it gets very confused, especially with something sensitive like this. So be very, very careful if you do use it.
Oh yeah, I mean, I wouldn't rely on it, but it's a one to give you a quick
Yes,
answer to everything.
absolutely.
This is
Sorry,
a
Mike.
big controversial question. This one, is there a limit on how many years you can attempt to apply? Um, you took 2 gap years, so you applied both times, didn't you?
Yes.
So you applied 3 times overall.
I didn't, funnily enough, apply in year 12 or year 13, that year when most students apply.
Oh,
So
okay.
when I applied, well, I actually had really bad AS level grades initially. When you do, I was in that year when it was changing into linear exams.
Oh,
So
okay.
halfway through modular and halfway through linear. So the year 12 grades did count. And unfortunately, my grades were pretty bad. And for most students, I'll say out there as well, I got B in uh, maths, not B, no, B in economics, sorry, C in biology, C in chemistry, and then E in maths. I had to resit every single module in year 13, and I ended up getting an A star, B, and an A in my AS level maths. And then I applied that year with a predicted an A in economics. I only got one interview from Plymouth. And then the year after, I applied to 4 other universities and ended up getting an offer at Hull York, Plymouth, and Exeter. So there is a limit, shortly put. You have some universities go up to 3 years, some go up to 4 years. It can vary for if you want to apply to the undergraduate degree.
Yeah,
However,
I think I'd say it's two is a general consensus from what I've now come to gather. Most are like, oh, you need to achieve it within 2 years.
so there's a bit of a clarification I have to make that you need the grades within 2 years. However, I think what this limit is how many times can you keep reapplying and how many gap years can you take? That can be anywhere between 3 to 6 years. There are some universities who will stipulate that in their admissions policy.
But then you also have to weigh up the pros and cons of taking so many. Can you keep on top of your
Absolutely.
knowledge and all these things? So I would say what you think is right. If you're like, I only want to take maybe 1 gap year, then that's fine. But if you're like, oh, well, maybe I can try again, then try again. But it's really I think this is more of a personal choice rather than a,
Absolutely.
a question you could really put a definitive number on.
Absolutely. And one quick thing about that as well is most people with the grades that we showed for student B, for example, with nines and A star A, generally 1 gap year, they will see a much higher score in UCAT. I would
Oh,
just say if you are somebody from those grades, give yourself a little bit more leniency to reapply rather than jumping into another degree. We have been mentioning this a lot that there is a certain strategy, and we'd love to go through every bit of information within this webinar, but there's so many things in this entire system. What I would recommend students to do is if you are very stuck and you want a bit of advice, and we do not give you any information that isn't publicly available to you, you can find this. But if you wanted to speak to an advisor like me or Bailey about this, we do run a service where you can sit with somebody like us for about an hour or 2 hours. We can discuss every single choice you can go into. One thing I would say though, if you do have a very low score in the UCAT, this isn't probably the best way to go about it. The consultation will not be of much support. However, if you are a student who perhaps is above the third or fourth decile, has the requirements, and is eligible for resale, has extenuating circumstances, that is probably the minimum threshold, I would say. But it's good to speak to somebody to have maybe your thoughts laid out, and we can go through the previous statistics with you. It's something we've run quite well over the last few years, right, Bailey?
Oh yeah, no, I mean I'd even recommend this for someone who does really well
Yeah,
because a lot of the time sometimes you can either go from having no or very limited choice to having all the choices in the world and you're kind of like a deer in headlights. So yeah, I mean it's a great service. I've helped run it for the last couple of years. You have as well. Um,
hmm,
and I think it's great to help the kids through it
yeah,
because it is a bit daunting.
absolutely. So if you guys want to scan that QR code to find out more, feel free to take a screenshot of it, scan the QR code. I'm leaving everyone a code for 10% off, which you can find in the Zoom chat. So save that somewhere. and it's also on the screen there. But anyways, we're going to move into the Q&A if that's fine. We've already answered that question, so we'll go into some Q&A. I do have to give a quick heads up. I think we wanted to spend more time on the Q&A, but we obviously been through so much, Bailey. But
Yeah.
there's a dentistry webinar straight after this at 6 p.m. So we're going to finish exactly at 6. So if I cut you off, Bailey, I'm really sorry for that.
No, you're fine.
I'll let Bailey take over for the Q&A. So if you've got any questions, feel free to ask at this stage by putting in the Zoom chat or raising your hand on Zoom if you want to talk out loud. And I think Bailey can unmute you as well.
So there are a few little questions from further up. We've got one about gap years. So RE gap years, do all universities offer deferred places? Deferred places was a thing during COVID when what happened was the algorithm. So when the university obviously gave out all these offers to people, and they didn't, well, they had oversubscribed their spaces. They said to people, a load of people go, can you come next year? And they did. Gap years are generally accepted across the board. So you never normally get any sort of disadvantage. If anything, you get an advantage because you've got achieved grades. And sometimes they take your A levels into account and then a smaller number of GCSEs, for example, if they do. We're going to look at a bit more at grad entry next week. So if you've got any burning questions about grad entry, if you can leave that to next week, that would be perfect.
I'm just going to unmute Hamalutha if that's fine, Bailey. I think she wants
Yeah,
to.
that's absolutely fine.
Hello.
Oh, hiya.
Hi, thanks for the session, Bailey. It's a lovely session and lots of information. And I'm from Republic of Ireland. My twin girls would like to do medicine, and I've given the score for them on the text message. And I was really very new to the system, and I wonder what are all the universities I can look for them, like even for that score. If you can just say the names, I will be going through those websites because loads of schools are there, and I only started to look around, so it's really confusing. So will you please guide me to go through?
I mean, the easiest thing for me to say to you at this point would be to book a consultation, because obviously there is a lot more to this than meets the eye. It's a very unique situation. So I would ideally like to sit down for quite a while and sort this out. Because I mean, I don't
think
know.
one thing is if you're applying from the Republic of Ireland, just very quickly, sorry to interrupt there, Bailey, is that you are generally considered a home student, if I'm correct. So you can look at the scores and the previous trends of home students for the last few years. Your daughter's scores are quite good for the UCAT overall, considering their grades. So you can apply to quite a few, especially for your daughter who scored 2080, sorry, with band 2. That is close to 700 average, which was before 2800, close to that range. So we can definitely recommend some university. What I suggest doing is that, like I said, we've only got 2 minutes left, but if you pull up all the admissions policies and scoring systems and then compare and contrast to her scores, that will be the best way. There are a few that comes to mind, really, for your daughters here, and I think the ones, like if you're looking to highly competitive ones like UCL Imperial, I'd probably avoid them because of their UCAT scores. And if you're looking for mid-range ones like Liverpool, Leeds, or even Manchester, those are very close to one of your daughters who got 2080. The one who got 1980, places like Holyoke Medical School, or even places like Belfast, which is very close to Republic of Ireland, that you could consider some of them as well. They off the top of my head, your scoring is quite good there, but have a look at it and see what we can do. And I think Andin will really quickly answer Andin's question, wrap it up there, guys, just for the other webinar, if that's fine. With the score of 1600, you're not probably going to be able to apply to any schools, unfortunately, just to very clearly put it there. Just because the score is quite low, unfortunately, and it will lead to rejections. The only way I would suggest at that point is a gap year. Anyways, guys, I have to wrap it up here. It's been a pleasure speaking to all of you, and thank you so much, Bailey, and thank you everyone for attending. I wish you all the best of luck. If you have any questions or you want to speak to any of us, please call us, give us an email, and yeah, thank you. Bye now.
Right, perfect. Take care.